All right, so today we are in Love and Torah, part 46. I know some of you are thinking, when is this thing ever going to end? Never. This teaching will at some point. And I keep looking at it and going, but there's so much stuff that needs to be covered and that we're still covering. And we're in Ephesians chapter 4, just towards the end of the chapter, going into chapter 5, and we're going to continue here. Look, this is, I have a teaching called The Heart of the Matter, but this is the heart of the matter. I mean, the heart of the matter is understanding how to love Him and how to love each other. If we can't figure that out, then we're missing everything. I mean, that's the two great command framework for all of what's given in the scriptures, is that we should love our Creator and we should love each other according to the way He designed it to be done. How He wants us to love Him and how He would like us to love each other. So we'll continue here in Ephesians chapter 4. I'm going to do a very brief, 5-second, covering of what we're where we left off, so we have framework. Okay, we're going to pick up, by the way, in chapter 4 and verse 25, where it says, therefore, having put off the false. Okay, but if you don't know what came before the words therefore, whatever comes after is not going to make a whole lot of sense. So let's quickly just remind us that the context of chapter 4 at this point is being called upon, therefore, to walk worthily of the calling. That's verse 1 of the chapter. Okay, so the context is he's trying to get us to understand what it looks like to walk worthily of the calling with which we were called. He then talks about doing it with humility and meekness, etc. And then he continues down, eventually tells us that there are 5 roles that are important in our growth. He talks about the fivefold ministry thing. And then going down from there, he talks about, I say in verse 17, that this is so that we understand that we should no longer walk as a Gentile walks. So now we're getting a comparison. By the time we get to verse 25, you need to know there's a comparison that's going on here. The comparison between the walk that we're called to and what we did outside of that, that's called the nations or the Gentiles. When you are in covenant, in the walk, you're called Israel. Everybody else is called Gentile. That's not a negative term. It's just that's the description for the two groups of people that exist on the planet. We don't have two groups by color or by sex or by this. There's two groups. Those that are covenanting with the Almighty and those that are not. And there's a desire of the Almighty that those that are not eventually come into covenant. So it's not meant to be us versus them. It's us now, them now, but eventually all of us together, hopefully. Okay? And so as we're getting this comparison, so you have the right context when we get to verse 25, so he's starting to give us a comparison. He even says the guys in verse 11 about the fivefold, they're there so that we don't act like children anymore in verse 14, and we're not tossed about by things that could confuse us, like all kinds of doctrines and impressive things and trickeries of this and that and the other thing, and the cleverness of men, but that we would maintain truth in love. And we should grow up in all respects into Him who is the head. That's the whole point, that Torah observance and all that we understand in Messiah is to have us to grow up into Him. The transformation process from going from what you are into what He is. Continuing, he says, look, we don't want you to walk as a Gentile. And he very specifically says, because when we were doing that, we were walking in the futility of our mind. In other words, we were doing things that were never going to get us what we wanted. He says, at that point, having been darkened in their understanding. That's what Gentiles do. They're darkened in their understanding, having been estranged from the life of Elohim because of the ignorance that is in them because of the hardness of their heart. So the combination here we talked about had to do with, on the one hand, not knowing, on the other hand, not caring that you don't know, thinking you know anyway. Not being willing to recognize what you don't know. And then it says, who having become callous, they went and did these other things. In other words, they had a callousness where I don't care, I know, and whatever the consequences, so what? I'm not doing what you want, I'm not going to covenant with you, I'm not going to have that relationship with you. He says, but verse 20 says, but you have not so learned Messiah. You haven't learned Messiah this way. So we also can read into that this discussion has a little bit to do with people thinking that they understand Messiah, but it's in a different way. He says, you haven't learned Messiah this way. Other people have learned Messiah that way, but not you. You have not learned Messiah this way. He says, if indeed you have heard him and we're taught by him as truth is in Yeshua, then you need to put off. So what the confusion is? Covenant, old way of life is Gentile. You can't see Messiah through the wrong filter. You can't see Messiah through the old filter. It's got to be through the new way of seeing him. And he says, look, to do that, you have to put off with regard to your old way of life, thinking, mindset, heart, the old man being corrupted according to the desires of the deceit, and to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. So the old way we thought, that old man, because of desire. See, a lot of you, I know you're getting tired of this. Well, you shouldn't be. You should be getting more and more excited about this. This is why you struggle. Your internal you has at some point been corrupted from what it was supposed to be. And what corrupts it is your feelings, your emotions, your desires. Not all feelings. I'm not saying feelings are bad, but it's those desires. I want, I like, I need, I don't want, I hate. Those feelings can corrupt you inside from being able to see the truth that is in him, that is in Yeshua, as you transform into that. Listen to what he said. He said, look, you need to bury that old man, put off the old man being corrupted according to the desires of the deceit. What's the deceit? You and everybody else trying to convince you that doing what you want is going to get you what you want. That's a lie. If you want to be in the kingdom and become Yeshua-like, you have to do it his way. There is no other way to get there. He says, I am the way. He didn't say I'm one of the ways. I am the way. And so there's corrupting of this information, both by outside influences and by your own desires. You will twist it and bend it to your own destruction because you don't like or you want or whatever it is. You got to be careful with that. But the answer to this is the renewing of the mind. You need to be renewed in the intrinsic nature of your mind, renewed in the spirit of your mind. His nature, let this mind be in you, Philippians 2:5. That was also in Messiah Yeshua. And then you put on the renewed man. You start transforming. And that new man was created according to Elohim. Don't think of this as one of those fiat waving of hands and he says his whatever magic healing over you. He tells you how to recreate you in his image. He gives you instruction on how to behave like, think like, and become like him. So you are now going to put on the renewed man, which was created according to Elohim. In other words, you're going to put yourself back in a factory reset mode to be what he intended you to be. This is not something he's going to do to you. What he did to you was make you aware. He opened up your eyes and your ears and your heart and your mind to be aware that this option was available. You now have to choose. You have to choose to then walk that out. Respond to the stimulus from him. He give you a little poke or whatever he did to get your attention. Now you have to respond to that. You can respond to it like, hey, leave me alone. Or you can say like, hey, what do you want? I'm here. I'm listening. Show me your way. Choice is yours. Then he says, as we're getting almost to verse 25 now, actually we're at verse 25, it says, therefore, based on everything I just said, this battle between the Gentile mind, the covenanted mind, understanding the old you versus the new you, of the difference between these things, of the corrupting of what was original and recreating it back and setting it to the original, so that which is corrupt has been renewed and set straight, so to speak. He says, therefore, verse 25, having put off the false, speak truth, each one with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Now, some of you probably have been taught that putting off the false has to do with specific teachings or ideas or concepts. He didn't say any such thing if you read the chapter like we just did. What is the false that he's talking about here? What is the false? He's going to explain to us here. Starting in verse 24, he says, it's a renewing of a man. And further back, he said, this Gentile mind and old Jew, that was a problem. That was false. You're now renewing to what is true. Don't let this be, well, the false was the Catholic Church, or the false was when I was in paganism. The false was, that's all true. That was false. That's not what he's talking about here specifically. You thinking that the old you was just fine, that was false. You're thinking that when he says you have not so learned Messiah, but you thought you understood Messiah, that was false. The corrupted part is false. So he says here, look, therefore you put off the false. That's all of that, not just one little specific pet thing that the church may have taught you or whatever group you were in. The context here is you in totality. You being in a place known as false, now being renewed and coming out of it into some place known as truth. This is also going to get compared later into chapter 5 of you being in light or you being in darkness. Different metaphor, same point. Just using a different illustration of it. Okay? So I said all of that to get to verse 25 so you understand what the word false means. Because all of that for one word in one verse. He says, therefore, having put off the false, speak truth. Okay, by speak truth, again, we're not talking about just speaking truth like Torah truth. Speak truth, speak reality. Understand, don't speak out of the abundance of the old man, the old Jew, the false ways, the callousness that was there, your lusts and your desires. That's not truth. Don't speak false, speak truth. Part of truth is recognizing when you fall short. Part of truth is recognizing when you compare you to him, where you need to fix things, where you need to grow, where you need to change. So it's not so much just speaking truth to each other. Speak truth to yourself. Start there. Because a lot of people will take these verses and take them to mean, I need to go set everybody straight about false doctrine. Now, doctrine is mentioned a little bit when we're talking about being tossed to and fro by every wind of teaching, etc. That is part of the context, but in the completeness of what he's talking about the false you and the real, true you. The you were created to be versus you have become up to this point. That's the truth versus the false. Can we see that? That's the real context here. Verse 25 finishes up and he says, look, each one of, having put off the false, speak truth, each one with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be honest and appropriate with each other in terms of your communication. If you're not sure something's true, don't spread it around. If you think that you're sure, you better be sure. Because if you're wrong, it's Lashon Hara, it's a problem. He says, verse 26, be wroth, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your rage, nor give place to the devil. Okay, let's look and understand what's going on here. So first of all, he's saying, look, you can get upset. People get upset. Things do anger us and get us upset. He says, oh, wait a minute, but do not sin. So apparently there's a way to, things happen, and let me start again. There's a way that when things happen that could and do upset you, you can respond to it that's not sin. It's how you respond that causes a problem for somebody else that's sin. Or how you respond in yourself, because maybe you get bitterness in yourself, that would be sin. You get unforgiveness in your heart, that could be sin. These things could lead to sin, not so much in themselves being sin, but they could lead to sin. He says, be wroth, but do not sin. He says, do not let the sun go down on your rage. In other words, you have to release this quickly. It's not about, some of you think, oh, well, in my marriage, we never go to sleep unless we fix everything. That's not possible. Some people need time to process. And so not everybody can process it in the window of time, especially if you're starting the problem right before you would normally go to bed. What it's saying is, don't let the sun go down. I think it's saying, you know what, let's not go more than 24 hours. Let's take a day at the most to handle, dissipate, release, resolve the anger. So when he says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath, on your rage, I think he's talking about how we hold on to. Maybe that makes more sense. Because I know some people will use that as a weapon to say to somebody, oh, well, you needed to fix this before we go to bed or else you're breaking the Bible. I don't think that's what it's saying. And it's not practical in a lot of ways. It just can't work that way. But we can understand that we shouldn't be holding on to something for days and days and days. He's saying there should be a finite amount of time that you need to deal with stuff. Handle it quickly. Work towards resolving it. Certainly release it. Now, verse 27, he says, nor give place to the devil. Don't give place to the devil. What in the world is that talking about? What does it mean to give place to the devil? If you don't understand the role that's being talked about here, it's not like giving place to a being and entertaining a demon or the devil and that kind of thing. He's saying, look, don't give place to, because we're talking about a mindset here, aren't we? A way of thinking. That's all, right? We're talking about the renewing of the mind and all these other things. What is Hasatan, if we use the Hebrew instead of the English from the Greek here? What does Hasatan mean? The adversary, okay? Satan means adversary. Hasatan is the adversary. He says, do not give place to being in an adversarial mindset. Adversarial, not really the main point being adversarial to each other, but being at an adversarial relationship to the one who created you, who instructs you how to be with each other. So I'm not saying that it's not about not being adversarial with each other. It is. But that's a part of the bigger picture that when you do these things, you're actually being an adversary to the one who instructed you. When he tells you to love your neighbor, when he tells you not to let the sun go down on your anger, when he tells you all these things, they do affect how you interact with each other. But it also puts you in a mindset of compliance, submission, and respect to the authority, or adversarial, disobedient conflict with the authority. And this is where that callousness is talked about in verse 19. We use the word callous from the idea of like, well, that person has a callous disregard for authority, or callous disregard for my feelings, or that's what it's talking about. He says, do not give place to be feeding into the mindset. We're comparing mindsets here. The human mindset is one, the Hasatan's got a mindset, and Elohim's got a mindset. He says, don't give in to the Hasatan mindset, that adversarial mindset, I'm going to go to war with you mindset, or you're not going to make me or this, that adversarial conflict that you get with people. Because then you're giving place to the devil. Not the way Christianity taught you. It's when you find yourself falling into that adversarial mindset. And your behavior starts being one where you're an adversary with authority, whether that's children with a parent, husbands with a wife, somebody in the ministry, your boss at work, but you can give in to this adversary, and then the next thing you know, you're having conflict with everybody because now you have a mindset of contentious adversarial behavior, where you're seeing everybody as an enemy. Look, Yahweh tells us that when you started off, you were at enmity. You were an enemy of his. Your behavior made you an enemy. And your behavior came out of your thoughts and your emotions. And so if you don't get your head and your heart right, you could find yourself behaving like an enemy. And then you're giving place to the devil. Okay? So let's be careful with that. It's very important that we understand this whole idea of what it means to give place to the devil. Then he continues, let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, so that he has somewhat to share with those in need. So what's verse 28 really talking about? He says, if you were productive, you'd never think to take from anybody because you provide for yourself. The problem is being unproductive. I'm going to hurt some feelings. Keep your feelings in the bag before I talk. Grab it up, throw it in the feelings bag. I don't care what your physical condition is. You can be productive. Okay? I mean, look at Stephen Hawking. Well, he passed away. But he was in a chair talking through a computer device and everything and was productive, wrote books. None of you are in that level of condition. Yeah, but he was a genius. So what? Okay? You can be productive on some level, somehow, some way. And you need to be, because that idleness is what gets your two things that happen out of that idleness where you're not being productive. One, you have way too much time on your hands and you do the worst possible thing. You think more than you should and dwell on all kinds of negative stuff. Not you think in a productive way. You just have all this time for stuff to just come into your head and beat yourself up and all that noise that gets in there, all that negative self-talk, and then you really end up in problems because you're not busy and having your mind set on other things. You have nothing to do but dwell on. So I'm not really saying think, you dwell on things. You need to be busy. You need to be productive. You need to do something. I'm not even talking about make money. Maybe you got plenty of it from disability or whatever other things you may have from your life. It's about doing something. You know, both my parents have done very well, my father before he passed and my mother now, in their retirement, where I've watched other people do terribly in their retirements, because they had things to do. They always had stuff that they wanted to do and that they were doing that kept them productively busy. You know, my father went in as a sideline after he retired into doing some desktop publishing things for local printers. He would make newsletters and just lay out and design and things. Just enough work to keep him busy, not to make any money. As a matter of fact, he only made enough money to buy new software once a year or a new computer every. I mean, it was just to keep him busy. My mother likes to make things. She knits, she sews, whatever she makes things. It's something productive. She's doing something, and she feels productive. See, a lot of you think, I can't wait to retire and do nothing. No, you'll hate that. You will hate that. Maybe not the first week, but you'll hate that. You will become bored, useless, and depressed. You need to be active. And don't tell me, but I'm handicapped. You can be active. I couldn't hardly move when I had the pneumonia. I still was active. I did anything that I could possibly do. And so you need to be productive. You will not be healthy emotionally and mentally if you're not productive. And notice I never said anything about earning a living. Be productive. Do something. Even if it's a hobby, it's something to do. You need to be doing. When you don't know what to do and don't have anything to do, that's when you get in the most trouble, all right? So look what he says here. Let him who stole steal no more. Why? But rather let him labor. So the connection that I'm making is because he says, look, if you were laboring, you would be not thinking about stealing. Because you'd be doing something to produce for yourself. He says, let's go now into verse 29. Let no corrupt word come out of your mouth, but only as such is good for the use of building up, so as to impart what is pleasant to the hearers. Okay, let's break this verse down a little bit. Okay, it says, let no corrupt word come out of your mouth. And we're going to have another chance in chapter 5 to deal with things like things that come out of our mouth. And, of course, this is where everybody wants to get in my face and say, there are bad words. No, there aren't bad words. This isn't talking about bad words. Let's break this down. The word corrupt there, the better translation has to do with the idea of it being corrupt, rotten, or useless. It has nothing to do with it being profane or unpleasant to your ears just because you don't like the sound of the word. Okay, he says, let no corrupt word. This is consistent with everything so far in chapter 4. That which is bent, twisted, rotten, or useless. Regarding what? Your life, your walk in Messiah, and your former you. Context is everything. Let's not get confused that all of a sudden, there's that word. No, it says, let no corrupt word in the context of all this come out of your mouth. And if you're not sure what it means, look at the rest of the verse. It says, but only, he's going to now give you the opposite of the corrupt word, that which is good for the use of building up. So the corrupt word tears down, undermines. The good word builds up. It's good for use in building up so as to impart what is pleasant to the hearers. Now, the word pleasant in the translation is terrible. It really doesn't mean pleasant. The word there is the root word for the same word as grace, like charis, grace. And as you understand, that means that this is something as to impart what is going to merit favor to the hearer. In other words, it's the thing that's going to impart what is beneficial or merits favor. So I'm going to say something that you can benefit from, that's good to help you in the building up, or I can say something corrupt that's going to tear down. So yes, if I use what you call a bad word in my attempt to tear you down and make you feel small, and I'm calling you a name, that's one thing that absolutely matches here. But it has nothing to do with the word I used. I could have used the word you approved of and had the same effect of tearing you down and making you feel small or useless or just to destroy your feeling about self-worth and all that other stuff. I could do anything like that. I could tear you down and not use one word you think is profane. But then I'd still be breaking this. So when he's talking here in verse 29 is that you, if you're doing all this, you're burying the old man, you're renewing yourself in the right mindset, you're going to not tear people down. You're going to only speak that which builds up. Wow, that's not going to be easy. But that's what he's talking about here. Because some of you are thinking, well, I never use those words. It's not talking about those words. Okay? No corrupt word. That's word that has become, that's a rotten word. Like rotten fruit. By the way, when it talks about a good tree bears good fruit and a bad tree that word, there's the same word for bad fruit is corrupt, rotten fruit, useless. So to give you another way of understanding that word, how he uses it in other places. So you all know the verse that says a good tree bears a good fruit and a bad tree bears bad fruit. So the word bad doesn't really give you the idea. It's rotten, useless, and not as designed. Corrupt means not as intended. So do not speak out of your mouth that which is rotten, useless, or not as he intended you to talk to people. And then you can say, well, that's where the bad word thing comes from. No, stop that. All right? Because then you'll miss the point. Because all you'll be hung up on is that you use those words that arbitrarily your society that you live in today has decided are no good. And other societies and other places have different words they think are no good. So it's not the point here. The point is the building up or the tearing down. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, and it's not about what is pleasant. I don't like the ISR translation. It's actually much better to put in there that which imparts benefit. Okay, speak to people what's going to impart what is beneficial, what merits favor to the person. Okay? And then verse 30, it says, do not grieve the set-apart spirit of Elohim, by whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Okay, so the word grieve, this is one of those verses, people always get very anxious and nervous. I don't want to do this. What did I do to grieve the Spirit? Everybody wants to know what's the unpardonable sin? What's all this? Stop worrying about all this. Walk your life the best you can. So what do you do to grieve the set apart? Well, first of all, grieve means in the here it means to make sad, disappoint. Okay, do not grieve. All right? If I love you and I care about you and I'm giving you everything you need and you, for whatever reason, stubbornly just choose to do whatever is dumb that's going to undermine everything I'm trying to help you do, I will be sad watching that. It will grieve me to watch you hurt yourself when I've given you everything to stay safe. But yet, it's your choice. And that will give me grief. I will be sad. He says, do not grieve the set-apart spirit of Elohim, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let's deal with the rest of it. What does it mean to be sealed? Sealed here means the idea of being stamped or marked for preservation. It doesn't mean sealed like you can't not get there. It doesn't mean you have your golden ticket and you're in. Okay? You've been stamped or marked with the intent that you be preserved. You've been selected for preservation. That doesn't mean you're going to get there, but you're marked for it. You've been sealed, okay? And then it says here, sealed for the day of redemption. So what's redemption? The Greek there has the idea of being ransomed in full. So you're not ransomed in full yet, but you've been marked to be ransomed in full in the future. Of course, you could choose not to get there. But I know a lot of times the mainstream people want to argue some case or another that once saved is always saved, or I'm sealed, or I'm marked, I'm this. And so I'm in. I've made my altar call and nothing I do matters, I'm getting in. Now, they're not dumb enough to actually say it that way, but that's what they're saying. They basically are saying that. Can you all agree? That's ultimately what they're saying. I'm sealed, so really, even though I'm making an effort here or there or not, it doesn't really matter, I'm in. But that's not what the verse is saying. The verse is saying, look, you Now remember, you're no longer walking as a Gentile. You're no longer in the futility of your mind, which that's futility of mind to think, hey, once saved is always saved. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. He says, but he's saying, look, when you're doing all of this, understand, you were, when he called you, you were marked and set apart to be there in the end. You were selected to be there in the end. You weren't guaranteed anything, but you were selected and chosen at that moment to be there. Because you couldn't be there if he didn't tell you, by opening your eyes and mind and heart. And if he didn't communicate with you, you couldn't get there. You'd still be a Gentile, darkened in the mind and having nothing. Strangers of the covenants, like in chapter 2, right? He says, you were there, let's see, in verse 11 in chapter 2, therefore remember you once Gentiles in the flesh. He says that at that time you were without Messiah, excluded from citizenship of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise, having no expectation, without Elohim. That's where this is the context of chapter 4 and 5 comes out of chapter 2, obviously. It flows forward, right? And so we get here, let's understand that verse 30 is simply saying, look, if you are going to have this coming out of the Gentile mind and renewing of your mind and coming to build in this new birth that you have, this creation of the new you, the new man, that when you act the old way, that's the point here, right? Comparing the two, you are grieving the set-apart spirit. You are making the spirit sad when you go and backwards and not forwards, like the dog returning to its vomit. Are we making any sense? This is what grieves the set-apart spirit, because you were selected at this time. Not that everybody won't have a selection moment, but this is your selection moment. And he's saying if you are selected and then you choose to not hear and follow and obey and covenant like you were selected to do, this will grieve the set-apart spirit. Is that simple enough? And then he says, verse 31, he says, and by the way, just to finish verse 30, he says, and don't forget that was sealed for what? The redemption or the ransoming in full. Right now you are partially ransomed, so to speak. The process has been started. You're in the process of the ransoming, so to speak, being finished. He paid his part. He died, paid the price, but you have a part. And so the fullness is when you finish your part and he's already done his. And when both are done, then you get fully ransomed, if that makes sense. Because at this point, even though he died so that you don't have to, you can still die. I mean, like permanent death. The fullness of the ransom is when you get eternal life. Verse 31, let all bitterness and wrath and displeasure and uproar and slander be put away from you along with all evil. So what's he talking about here? The same thing that he was talking about, let no corrupt word come out of your mouth. That's what it looks like. He's giving you more information to understand. What does it look like, corrupt words? Bitterness, wrath, displeasure, uproar, slander. That's corrupt. Useless, rotten. Okay? He says, along with all evil. What's evil? I've defined this for you like 100 times. What's evil? Anything that goes against the way Yahweh designed it to be. So, just speaking improperly with bitterness, wrath, displeasure, uproar, etc., that's one aspect of not doing what he wanted you to do, but then you can still mechanically do all the things that you weren't designed to do. So that's what he says, and all evil. First he talks about how you can address each other, then he talks about the evil. It's evil when you don't eat right. It's evil when you don't keep the days he tells you to. It's evil, you go on and on. It's evil when you steal. It's evil when you covet. It's evil when you murder. It's evil when you commit adultery. It's evil when you do idolatry. These are all evil acts. But he also wants you to understand that in this context of all this, is how we talk to each other. So he adds them together. Bitterness, wrath, displeasure, uproar, slander, and all evil. Even though those things are evil as well. He says, and be kind towards one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as Elohim also forgave you, Messiah. Now this is the brutally hard part, the last few words. Some of you just read the beginning. Be kind to one another and tender-hearted, forgiving one another, and that's where you stop. And you get in each other's face, well, you need to be nice to me and have tender heart towards me and forgive me, etc. That's true. But look what he's talking about here. We need to forgive as Elohim also forgave you in Messiah. Now we're talking about Elohim-level forgiveness. You know, Elohim forgives. Is there any sin that you can do that he doesn't forgive? If you commit murder, can he forgive you? Can you commit adultery? Can he forgive you? Can you steal? Can he forgive you? Can you do idolatry? Can he forgive you? I mean, what is it that you can do that he can't forgive you as far as it's a standard sin? Because everybody that's being called has done any or many of those things. All of us have done something on the list. Not the list I gave, but the full list, okay? Because maybe the few items I listed you didn't do. But you've done something, and you do them on a regular basis. All fall short. Yet, how do we then judge one another when the forgiveness has to be an Elohim-level forgiveness? Well, I can't forgive her because she did this, or I can't forgive him because he did that. I'm sorry. Do you want your father to treat you the same? Well, he doesn't do that. Well, Matthew says differently. Yeshua says in Matthew that if you don't forgive others, your Father in heaven doesn't forgive you. In case you're like, where does it say that? In the model prayer, Matthew 6, right? He says in verse 14, he says, for if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father shall also forgive you. But, if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither shall your Father forgive your trespasses. Ouch. Chew on that for a little while. Because a lot of you really struggle with, well, yeah, I could forgive a lot of things, but I can't forgive that. Do you want Yahweh to look at you that way? You're all done if that's the way it is, every one of us. If he looked at us that way, we might as well just pack it in and give it up. Well, I can forgive everything, but I can't forgive that. Now, by the way, you need to listen to the teaching, forgiveness, restoration, reconciliation. I didn't say you need to be reconciled and restored to everybody. You have to forgive it, though. There is no choice, there is no option not to do that. If you do, you will be bitter. You will have all these other things inside of you that will then be a problem. But you have to forgive like he forgives. But he also tells you that if you don't, I won't either. That's the only thing that he can't forgive is if you won't forgive. It's not that he can't, he won't. He says, why should I do for you what you won't do? You want me to forgive you? Good, forgive them. You don't want to forgive people? Then why should I forgive you? Wow. I mean, everybody goes in, our Father that art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, blah, blah. No, get to the part where it says, and if you don't forgive others, he won't forgive you. The other stuff sounds so nice and pretty, give us our daily bread and blah, blah, blah. There's serious stuff in that model prayer. Yeshua said you need to pray this way, so you need to remember that if you're going to pray and you're not forgiving, you're asking for all kinds of things he's not going to give them to you. Now, let me make sure I'm very clear about one thing, because this fits into what we're talking about in Ephesians, how we talk to one another. You, all of you, never, okay, let's be clear, never have the authority to tell somebody they haven't forgiven. Knock that off. Well, I don't know if I'm having a problem because my best friend or my mother or this one or that one told me that I have an unforgiving heart because I haven't reconciled with them. That's not forgiveness, that's reconciliation. Don't listen to that. Nobody has the right to tell you whether you've forgiven somebody or not. You know the truth, and you know if you have or you haven't. I've got people so confused because people are in their face, they don't even know if they're forgiven or not. Well, I don't know, maybe I haven't. Why? Because I don't want to restore that. Well, forgiveness is not restoration. Now, it's a necessary step if you want to restore, but you don't have to restore. If I've done something to you, you may not want to put yourself in a position where I might do it again. However, you still have to forgive me and not hold that. What's forgiveness? Go back to the teaching. I'll give it to you in 3 seconds, which is releasing the negative emotional content towards the thing that happened. Okay? Let go the negative emotions connected to what happened. That's forgiveness. That's when you say this, look at the person in the eye and say, I'm not mad at you anymore. I'm not angry. I don't hate you. I just don't want to put myself back in a position that might happen again. Oh, so you haven't forgiven me. Yes, I have. Now, you can't make them stop that, but I'm telling you, you need to stop that. You need to stop saying it to other people. Oh, well, you just have an unforgiving heart, or you just have an unforgiveness problem. Who are you to know that? Well, but they haven't done what I think forgiveness is, so therefore it must be. Well, nobody cares what you think forgiveness is. I'm trying to be blunt, I'm sorry. But nobody cares what you think anything is. What matters is what he thinks it is. All right? Because I get counsel session after counsel session throughout the year on a very regular basis from people that people are so in their face about this forgiveness thing that they have actually gotten confused and they're not even sure they're forgiven because the person is so relentless about trying to convince them they haven't forgiven. And the person's like, but I know I have. I'm not mad at them anymore. So then why do you let people speak into you that are unqualified to do that? So I'm going to make this as clear as I can. Nobody with a flesh suit on the planet today is qualified to say whether or not you forgave or not. Nobody. Not me, not your husband, not your wife, not your mother, not your father, nobody. Only person who knows is you. Does that make sense? So stop listening to people and letting them speak into you that have no qualification in that specific area to do that. As a father, my children should listen to me about things that come from a father. As a mother, they should listen to their mother. As a wife, you should listen to your husband. You understand what I'm saying? On that level about those things. But there's nobody that has the right or the authority to know whether or not you've forgiven or not. Nobody. Only Yeshua and the Father know, and you. That's it. And so understand that. Because otherwise you have this bitterness, wrath, and displeasure and uproar going on because you didn't release the anger a few verses earlier and you didn't go to, within that little limited time frame. And that's all connecting all of this together. This is not just like a verse and then a verse and then a verse. This is Paul talking to the Ephesians about something that's going on there. And all of it ties together because this goes all the way back to chapter 2 and probably all the way back to the beginning of chapter 1. He has a point he's trying to make, and inside of it are lots of other points that are tied together in the big point. What's the big point we're seeing so far? There's two different ways to see everything, and one is your old way, and one is the new way, and when the old way filters into the now, you're getting in trouble. That's the big message. The second little level is, and there are people here to help you do it, these fivefold guys. And how you do this, the third little piece is how you do this with each other. So you got your personal journey of dealing with the old and the new, the old you and the new you. Then that journey interacts with other people, so how to do that correctly. And you've got people to help you. That's the summary of the first 4 chapters here. But did you ever get that reading this before? And if you didn't, now you know. But you've always had people isolate little pieces of verse. See, this is the verse that says why you can't do this or why that's that. I don't know. Does it really say that? Let's read the rest of it and see what it really says. You need the context. Some of you think, well, why do you have to go back all the way to chapter 4, verse 1 to get to verse 25? Because it doesn't make sense if you don't know and you don't remember the context. Oh yeah, some of you are watching this now and you just watched the previous part 5 minutes ago because you're watching it after it's already done live. You're not watching it live. But the rest of you was 2 weeks ago. And so you have to remember from 2 weeks ago what the context was. That's not so easy. Maybe you were smart, well, not so smart. Maybe there was some wisdom where you played the previous part knowing you're going to hear this part today and you went and listened to the previous one so you kind of remember where we left off. That would have been wise. Okay? Not necessary, but it would have had some wisdom to it. When I go to teach, I go and look at the whole context of where I came from, and I remember where we came from before I get to verse 25 where we left off. Because it's all part of a primary message with little secondary pieces to the primary, extensions that are connected to the primary message. The primary message is we're going to be going through this new man journey to become like Yeshua, and in doing so, you got to realize that there's a right way to learn Yeshua and there's a wrong way to learn Yeshua, because you've not so learned Messiah, is what he's saying. If you were trained by him, or were you trained by other people? And I'm not talking about other people. I mean, the person speaking, were they speaking Yeshua's words or their own words? Because he doesn't train you just through the Ruach. But were you trained and discipled by one of, because he didn't just tell the guys, hey, guys, go tell everybody out there that if they believe in me, I'll come and talk to them directly. He didn't do that with the apostles. He says, go out and make disciples like I did with you. But don't corrupt what I taught you. And that's what Paul's basically saying. Here, look, if you're going to corrupt it, then you were not taught Messiah that way. Don't do that. Don't do that. He says, rather be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as Elohim also forgave you in Messiah. That's the important part. And actually, if you really, I just been reading that last part again, he forgave you in Messiah. What's that mean? How did he forgive you in Messiah? Messiah laid down his life so you could live. You won't lay down anything, let alone your life. I know I'm being extreme, but think about what on any level that may apply to you. What things or how many things are you not willing to lay down? I'm not talking about breaking Torah. I'm talking about the I, me, personal emotional preference thing, so that others can have a blessing, so that you get to suffer and lose a little bit to the blessing of somebody else. In other words, dying to self, so that others can have. Esteeming others above yourself. That's very scriptural, right? We know that verse. The context continues, so I don't know why there's a chapter break there, but the whole thing he's saying does not slow down. It's not a new topic. He's now continuing. Because he says in verse 1 of chapter 5, become then. The then means because of everything I just said. I want you to become something because of what I just said. Become then imitators of Elohim as beloved children. Imitate Elohim, how do I do that? Well, Yeshua said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And the disciples are, if you've seen us, you've seen Messiah. Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Messiah. Not right here, but in other places. He says, imitate me as I imitate Messiah. He says, become then imitators of Elohim. Elohim tells us what it looks like to be him. We have a part of the book that tells us what to do, and another part where we actually see Yeshua doing things, so we see what it looks like. We also see people successfully applying their covenantal walk, and other people not so successfully doing it. And we can almost always, not saying it's not always there, it's always there, but we almost always can see where the corruption caused the problem. Sometimes we're not always clear what went sideways, but most of the time we can see where somebody corrupted some idea, some thought, something they were supposed to do, they started doing it in a whole different, twisted, wrong way, and it went south, it went sideways, whatever word. I like the word sideways because I think about the straight path, and when you go sideways, you're off the path. Instead of going forward, you go sideways. You go in a whole wrong direction. He says, become then imitators of Elohim as beloved children. As beloved children. Children that love their father. Children that feel loved by their father. Children that respect their father. In other words, if you're going to become imitators, you do this in a loving, respectful, childlike manner. And recognizing that as a child, you need protection, you need guidance, you need instruction. You don't know everything. At least not until you're a teenager. Then you know less than nothing, but you think you know everything. And I don't mean to be insulting to the teenagers. You're in a very dangerous place emotionally and mentally because you think you know everything when you don't know what you don't know. A child knows it doesn't know. A child walks around going, I don't know, how do I do this? I don't know, help me, help me, help me. What's this, what's that? They're asking 5 million questions. Teenagers don't ask because they think they know everything and they don't know what they don't know. It's a very dangerous place to be. And then guess what? You're a teenager still in your mind at 40, at 50, and you still don't know what you don't know, and you still think you know everything. That's challenging. You know, it's like I've talked to people that come into this and they start really debating strongly with things that I teach or things that decisions we made that way that have to do with the scripture, and I come to find out they've been doing this for 6 months or they've been walking this for 2 years. And I'm thinking, that's not even remotely long enough to have the slightest idea what you don't know. But you know what? These are people that read their Bible 57 times, thought they know the verses and everything, or they went to seminary or whatever it was, and they taught Sunday school or whatever, so they think they're already coming with an authoritative understanding. They just need to fix a few little tweaks. The depth of what you don't know is cavernous, okay? It's huge. I'm not saying that to be insulting. You will, if you're open to it, always be on an amazing journey of discovery of what you don't know. And you'll sit there going, I thought I knew this. I didn't know it. We all go through that. Look, when I first did the teaching, Search for the Doctrine of Grace, it wasn't for the purpose it is now. The first time I did it in probably 2001 or something, okay? And all I was trying to show was that there is no such doctrine. It's not a doctrine. Grace is not a doctrine. As a matter of fact, nobody really talks about it except Paul. Yeshua never talks about it. The one place he does, he says, if you only love those who love you, what grace does it get you? Which is really, what does it merit you? And that was the point of that teaching. And then this time when I did it a few years back, I came to see that I never understood that it was merited favor, not unmerited favor. Wow, I did not know that. I did not know that. Every time I teach, I see things that I didn't see before. You have to be open to the vastness of what you don't know. And be careful when you get very adamant about what you think you know, only to find out later that you were wrong. We've played that game many times. The game of, have you ever been wrong? Yeah. Were you ever wrong about something that you knew, you're still wrong? Yeah. Any chance that'll happen again? Yeah. Well, then why do we act like, naive idiots? I'm being really honest here. Like that somehow we forget that that's obviously going to happen again in our life. He says we need to walk and do these things and imitate Elohim as beloved children, with that understanding that I don't know. I mean, children almost go too far sometimes where we know that they know, but they still want to act like they don't know because they just want you to do it for them or something. But at least they have a better understanding of what they don't know than what we do as we get older thinking we know. And this is challenging. Verse 2, and walk in love as Messiah also loved us. So he wants us to walk. So walk in love, you have to understand from a Hebraic point of view, the word holech, which is to walk, or halacha, or walk, is a very active thing, always being referenced to covenantal behavior. To live life and walk out the transformation from what you are to what he is. That's what covenantal life is all about. And he tells us to do that in love. So he's not just saying walk like live life. He could have said, well, then live your life in love. No, he wants you to walk this out, not just walk in general. Walk this out in the context and framework, attitude, and approach called love. And if you're not sure what that looks like, he continues, says, as Messiah also loved us. So we need to walk it out like he did. Expressing love like he did. The Father so loved that he gave his Son. The Son so loved that he was willing to die for you. That's love on an extreme level. And we need to walk, oh no, I can't talk to that person because of this or that or this and that, and we have no ability. I struggle with this like everybody else. If you're married, you cannot tell me that the majority of your issues aren't over dumb things. You can't. You can't tell me that you don't fight most of the time when you fight over something that if you really thought about it, makes no sense to fight over. But something got you and irritated you. This happens to me all the time, happens to all of you all the time. I know, I counsel you guys. And it's not just because it's you. I could counsel anybody, and it would be the same. How do I know? Because we're designed with at least a switch in us that activates when something's important, and then we don't act so stupid. Somehow we're able to deal with things when it's real and it's important in a totally different way. We tolerate, we have patience, we're thicker skinned, because it's an emergency, it's something big. But when it's something stupid, we act stupid. We have no tolerance, there's no love, there's no patience, there's no the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, etc. All that goes out the window over some dumb thing. Well, I don't like the way you said that, or why did you say this, or how come? And then we argue and fight and get offended and hurt, all because over dumb stuff. I mean, the people out to say that human beings are dumb as dirt, they're not wrong. We're foolish. Not so much dumb. I don't want to say dumb sounds like we're just uneducated or anything. No, we're foolish. We do foolish things. Unproductive. We should know better. And if we look back, we wonder, how in the world could I have acted that way? Or why did whatever that other person do make me so upset or hurt me so much or whatever it is? Because we're not ready to do this stuff yet. He says, Messiah, who loved us, gave himself for us. I give myself for my family on this level. I give myself for my spouse or my kids on this level. Or you're busy making your stand and fighting that fight. Now you're acting in that devil-like way. You're an adversary. We go into the adversarial mindset. We're ready to go to war and go put on the gloves and start throwing blows. Not the way to go. Not the way to go. He says, the Messiah gave himself for us a gift and an offering to Elohim for a sweet-smelling fragrance. Listen to what he just said. This is incredible. He didn't say he gave himself for us so that we could have all kinds of wonderful things. He did it because it was pleasing to Elohim. Did you follow that? When you need to do what you need to do with those around you to express love, you're doing it because it will create a sweet-smelling fragrance to Elohim. And you're loving that person and doing that will make Elohim. Now, we talk about grieving the Spirit. This is the other side of it. Do this, and you bring joy to Elohim through the Spirit. He's proud of you. He's pleased with you when you do these things. He says, Yeshua gave himself for us, but as a gift and an offering to Elohim. Because it's Elohim's good pleasure to have us have eternal life and to make it into the kingdom, etc. And Yeshua did this because it was going to make his Father happy, in addition to making us happy, but primarily because it's what his Father wanted. Love your wife, love your husband, love your children, because it will make Elohim happy. I don't want to make them happy. That's so rotten. No, do it because it makes him happy. It's the metaphor that's sweet. It smells good. When you smell something that's really great, that sweet-smelling fragrance. I don't care if it's a food or a flower, whatever it is, that just makes you go, that's just good. It just makes you happy and it makes you feel good. That's what he's saying. It's a sweet, pleasurable sensation or fragrance to Elohim when you give a Messiah-like gift of love. This is not easy. Think about what Yeshua had to go through in giving that gift. It wasn't all, joy for him. It was massive suffering. And then worse than that, look at how we return the favor. The way we behave. And he's sitting there going, I died for you? You can't even show up for this or that. You can't forgive this or that. You can't lay down this or that. Whatever it is. And I died for you? Those of you who think, well, I'm not really into it today. I'm going to Shabbat at home. Shabbat at home? If you have a place to go, why would you Shabbat at home? No, I'm tired. Well, Yeshua wasn't tired and exhausted by the trial and being up all night and all day and scourged and all the other stuff. I'm tired. I think I'll just stay home. I get it when you're not feeling well. That's fine. As a matter of fact, we prefer you to stay home if you're not feeling well because then you don't share that with anybody. But Where's the strength of emotion to do what's pleasing to the Father and to do, he says, you need to assemble. That's what's called a Mikra Kodesh, a holy assembly. That's what it says in Leviticus 23. These are Mikra Kodeshim, the days, the appointed times, but they're like dates. They're considered like the bride and the groom coming to meet. And why wouldn't you show up for that? Well, because I don't like the teacher, and I don't like this, and I don't like that, or I'm just tired, or it's been a rough week, and I just needed to sleep. We start at 1. How much sleep do you need? Okay? We don't start at 8. Go to the synagogue, they start at 8. And they go all day. We start at 1. Oh, but I've had a busy day, and it's Tuesday night, and I got to make dinner and everything else, and I'll just watch Torah study online. You're not hurting anybody, by your stay. I mean, you're missing out. We need each other. This is a group activity also done on an individual level, okay? Or as I used to say, it's an individual activity done in a group context. He gave himself for us. I guess I don't have anything more to say. You'll have to just meditate on that yourself, okay? I don't know what else more I can say. You have to think about that. You have to really think about these things. I want you to embrace what that is all about. He said, I'm going to just wrap it up with these verses here. He says, but whoring and all uncleanness, greed of gain, let it not be named among you, as is proper among set-apart ones. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather thanksgiving. For we know this, that no one who whores is unclean, or greedy of gain, who is an idolater, etc., has an inheritance in the reign of Messiah and Elohim. Do you understand what we're talking about here? He's saying, look, on the one hand, you need to be imitators of Elohim, this new person that walks in love and gives himself for others, is not going to whore or do all uncleanness. Now, greed of gain there actually has a better understanding of, let me just make sure I can get the translation here for the verse. It's better translated covetousness with the perspective of aggressively seeking to gain an advantage. I don't want you to just think about money there. He says, nobody who is, let me just read this again, who is coveting. Remember, that's the commandment, the 10th commandment has to do with coveting. Desiring something, but is going to aggressively go about trying to gain an advantage because you want something. This is what caused Korach such a problem. He was doing this. He wanted to gain a position. He wanted authority. He coveted something. He was aggressive about it. So I just want you to understand where that comes from, because I don't want you to think it's a money thing. But whoring and all uncleanness or greed of gain, let it not be named among you, as is proper, set apart ones. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which is not fitting, but rather thanksgiving. So foolish talking, fairly simple. We're talking about people that are throwing out things that's foolishness, and somehow it's being packaged as wisdom. It's not just saying don't be silly. We're silly. We're allowed to be silly. He created us to have a humor and to enjoy a little bit of silliness. But that's not the same as foolish talking. Speaking foolish is like saying, well, I guess I just don't think I can make it. That's foolish. He called you, you can make it. Okay, foolish talking, what's the opposite of foolish? Wisdom. So when you're not saying something that's wise, this is foolishness. But he also talks about filthiness. Those things that would make you unclean, dirty. Coarse jesting. Coarse jesting, again, isn't necessarily foul language. Coarse jesting, I'm going to look for the verse here where I have it. Let's see. I thought I wrote it down, but I didn't. Okay. Coarse jesting is very simply that. When you are teasing someone to hurt them, to embarrass them, you think it's funny, but they don't. See, you can jest, and as long as both sides understand it's supposed to be funny and take it as funny, it's not coarse jesting. But if somebody's going to be the butt of the joke, so to speak, the target of the joke, and they're not going to think it's funny, this is not appropriate. This is hurtful. Now, you may have a friend where you guys like to throw them back and forth and you both love it. That's not coarse jesting. because you both understand and have a relationship that you know where it's coming from, and it's a game that you play and you enjoy it. But he's saying we should be very careful, though, not to make fun of, belittle at someone else's expense and think it's funny. That's not funny. It's not fitting. He says, but rather, do what you do it with thanksgiving. So I would also say that if what you're going to do rather is have thanksgiving, that this filthiness, foolish talking, coarse jesting, etc., are things that show a lack of appreciation. There's no thankfulness in it. And so there may be a way that you need to study this out and think, Father, what could I be doing that's filthy, coarse, foolish, etc., that's connected to not being thankful? Because he's connecting it to thankfulness. He's saying on one side is thanksgiving, and the other side is his other stuff, the coarse jesting, the filthiness, the unclean, etc. Most things in life, you can really understand can be kind of fixed and elevated in our emotional place if you start off with appreciation and thanksgiving. Because then you won't do these other things because it's coming from a different place. Out of the abundance of the bitterness, the anger, the frustration comes the coarseness, the inappropriate stuff, the foolish talk. Hopefully we make sure that we understand that, okay? All right, we'll finish with that, but we have to understand that if the impact at the end is, because we need to know, he says, he says, this you should know that no one who does these things has an inheritance with Elohim. Wow. So it's not just that you're doing something like someone thinks, well, you have a dirty mouth or this or that. It's the causing of harm, the treating someone in a wrong way, the inconsiderate behavior towards someone else, rudeness. That's hopefully what we understand. Are we understanding this? Okay? And we'll close with that. Father, we come before you. And Father, we want to truly embrace this walking worthy of our calling and understand how this plays through in terms of the old us with our new walk, and how we can keep the old man from rearing its head into our new walk and our new life. And we can understand the details of how this is to be done in love as Messiah has loved us, and how we can imitate that behavior, that we can become imitators of Yeshua and imitators as beloved children. So, Father, that we can have the right approach and the right attitude, that we can recognize that we don't know what we don't know. So, Father, we want to thank you again, as always, for your compassion and your mercy and your infinite patience with the children that we are, and the hard-headed, thick-headed, stiff-necked behavior that we tend to exemplify as we end up, embracing the mindset that's the adversarial mindset by giving place to the devil, so to speak. And we know that doesn't mean literally letting a being take control of us, but it's a mindset that we feed into that imitates him instead of doing, as you're teaching us here, to imitate you. So, Father, we just want to thank you again. Ask that you would fill us with our desire to have wisdom and understanding that's all based in the fear of you, so that we have a proper awe and reverence and respect. Father, we thank you, we praise you, and we ask all in the name above all names, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Amen.